The small town of Pine Creek sat nestled between rolling hills and a winding river that had sustained its people for generations. Most folks there knew each other by name, greeted one another at the local grocery store, and gathered for community events at the town square. Among them lived May Lynn, a quiet woman who had moved to Pine Creek 5 years ago and now worked as the town librarian. May wasn't what you'd call eye-catching. She wore simple clothes, usually plain button-up shirts and sensible skirts that reached below her knees. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a neat bun, and she rarely wore makeup. Most days, she carried the same worn leather bag that held her lunch, a book, and a small notebook where she jotted down thoughts and observations. The library where May worked was a small brick building with large windows that let in streams of sunlight. She loved how the dust particles danced in those beams of light as she moved between shelves, organizing books and helping the occasional visitor find what they needed. The smell of old paper and wood polish had become a comfort to her. This quiet life suited May just fine. Every morning, May walked the same path to work, crossing the old stone bridge that spanned the creek that gave the town its name. She'd stop halfway across, looking down at the clear water flowing beneath. It was a small ritual that brought her peace before starting her day. But one Tuesday morning in early spring, something caught her eye. The water, normally so clear you could count the pebbles at the bottom, had a strange, oily sheen to it. May frowned, leaning over the stone railing for a closer look. Tiny rainbow patterns swirled across the surface. Beautiful, but definitely not natural. Odd, she whispered to herself, making a mental note to check it again the next day. By Friday, the oily patches had grown, and May noticed a faint chemical smell rising from the water. During her lunch break, she walked upstream, following the creek's path to the edge of town where a large construction site had sprung up over the last few months. The sprawling work site belonged to River Edge Development Corporation, a big company from the city that had promised to bring jobs and prosperity to Pine Creek with their new luxury living community. Heavy machinery rumbled behind tall chain-link fences adorned with colorful banners showing happy families enjoying riverside homes. May stood at the fence, watching workers in hard hats moving around the site. Near the back, close to where the creek curved around the property, she spotted several large drums. One had tipped over, its contents leaking into a drainage ditch that fed directly into the creek. She took photos with her phone and walked around to the site office, a prefabricated building with the company logo emblazoned on its side. Inside, a young man with tired eyes sat at a desk covered in blueprints and coffee cups. "Can I help you?" he asked, barely looking up. "I noticed some chemicals leaking into the creek," May said, her voice soft but clear. "It's affecting the water, downstream." The man sighed as if he'd heard this before. "Ma'am, everything here meets code. We have all the proper permits. But I've seen—" "Look," he cut her off. "If you have concerns, you can file them with the town council. We're just following the approved plans." May left, unsatisfied but not discouraged. That evening, she went to the town library's archives and looked up everything she could find about local water regulations and environmental protection laws. She printed out the environmental impact statement that River Edge had filed with the town, a thick document full of technical language and reassurances about their commitment to eco-friendly development. For the next 2 weeks, May spent her evenings comparing what the company had promised with what she observed happening at the site. She took water samples, photographed the changes in the creek, and documented everything in her notebook with careful, precise handwriting. When she felt ready, May attended the monthly town council meeting. She sat quietly through discussions about the summer festival and road repairs until the floor opened for public comments. "The creek is being polluted by chemicals from the River Edge construction," May stated, standing at the microphone, her voice slightly shaky but determined. She showed her photos and presented the water samples she'd collected. Mayor Thompson, a tall man with a booming voice who always wore the same red tie to meetings, looked uncomfortable. "Ms. Lynn, River Edge has provided all the necessary documentation, showing their compliance with environmental regulations." "Their documents don't match what's actually happening," May replied, pulling out specific pages from the impact statement. "See here? They claim to have a containment system for runoff, but there isn't one. And these chemicals they're using aren't what they listed in their application. The council members exchanged glances. A woman in an expensive-looking suit stood up from the audience. "I'm Vivian Porter, Regional Director for River Edge. I can assure the council and this concerned citizen that our company follows all environmental guidelines to the letter." Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she continued. "Perhaps Ms. Lynn is confused about what she's seeing. Construction sites can appear messy to untrained observers." Several council members nodded, seemingly relieved to accept this explanation. "I'm not confused," May said quietly. "The creek is being contaminated, and it will eventually affect our drinking water. We appreciate your concern," Mayor Thompson said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "But we have experts who monitor these things." For the next month, May tried everything she could think of. She wrote letters to the state environmental agency called the Regional Water Authority, and even attempted to speak directly with workers at the construction site. Each time, she was politely dismissed or outright ignored. Meanwhile, the water in the creek grew worse. Fish began washing up dead along the banks, and residents started complaining about strange tastes in their tap water. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, May sat in the library surrounded by law books she'd requested from other branches. A tall, elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses approached her table. "Doing some heavy reading?" he asked, looking at the books with interest. May glanced up. She recognized him as Mr. Harlow, a retired teacher who came to the library often. "I'm trying to understand if there's a legal way to stop what's happening to our creek," she explained. Mr. Harlow pulled out a chair and sat down. "I heard you at the council meeting. They didn't give you a fair shake." "No one will listen," May said, frustration creeping into her voice. "River Edge is breaking environmental laws, but they keep getting away with it because they bring money to town." "Sometimes," Mr. Harlow said thoughtfully, "when the system fails, you have to force it to work by using the system itself." "What do you mean? Have you considered filing a lawsuit? Not just a complaint, but an actual lawsuit against River Edge?" May almost laughed. "Me? I'm not a lawyer. I couldn't afford one either." "You don't always need a lawyer to file a lawsuit. It's called representing yourself pro se. Difficult, yes, but not impossible." That conversation planted a seed. Over the next few weeks, May devoted every spare moment to studying environmental law. She learned about precedents, how to file legal documents, and the specific regulations that applied to water protection. The more she learned, the more certain she became that River Edge was violating multiple laws. When news spread that the town's water testing had found elevated levels of harmful chemicals, but the mayor was still delaying action, May knew it was time. She gathered her evidence, prepared her documents, and with hands that trembled slightly from both fear and determination, filed a lawsuit against River Edge Development Corporation. The day she received confirmation that her case had been accepted, and a court date set, May felt a strange mix of terror and resolve. She had no illusions about what she was up against. A powerful company with a team of experienced lawyers would try to crush her. They would see only a plain, simple woman who worked in a library, someone they could easily intimidate or dismiss. But they didn't know what burned inside her, the quiet determination that had always been her strength. They would underestimate her. And somehow, May thought as she organized her files and prepared for the battle ahead, that might be the only advantage she needed. As word spread through Pine Creek about the librarian taking on River Edge, reactions were mixed. Some people cheered her on, grateful that someone was finally standing up for their town. Others worried she was bringing trouble, risking the economic benefits the development promised. A few even stopped coming to the library, as if her challenge to authority might somehow be contagious. May didn't let any of it distract her. The creek, the water, the health of everyone in town, these things mattered more than her comfort or what people thought of her. With each day that passed, her resolve only grew stronger, even as the looming court date sent butterflies swarming through her stomach. What River Edge and their high-priced lawyers didn't realize was that this seemingly ordinary woman was about to change everything. The quiet librarian they were preparing to ridicule in court was not at all what she seemed. The county courthouse stood like a mountain of stone and dignity in the center of downtown, its marble steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps seeking justice. On the morning of the first hearing, May arrived an hour early, clutching her worn, leather bag now stuffed with carefully organized documents. Her stomach felt like it was tied in knots, but her face revealed nothing as she climbed those imposing steps. Inside, the vaulted ceilings and polished wooden benches made her footsteps echo. A few early arrivals, mostly court staff and lawyers in crisp suits, glanced at her with mild curiosity before returning to their conversations. May found a seat in the back corner of the courtroom, took out her notes, and reviewed them one last time. By 9:30, the room had transformed. The River Edge legal team arrived like an invading army, 8 attorneys in expensive suits, each accompanied by assistants carrying leather briefcases and boxes of documents. They filled the entire left side of the courtroom, their confident voices and occasional laughter bouncing off the walls. "Is that her?" May heard one of them ask, not bothering to lower his voice as he nodded in her direction. "The librarian?" "Apparently," another replied with a smirk. "This should be quick." More people filtered in, curious locals, a reporter from the Pine Creek Gazette, and a few environmental activists who had heard about the case. Mayor Thompson and 2 council members slipped in and sat directly behind the River Edge team, making their allegiance clear. At exactly 10 Sour, a side door opened and the bailiff called out, "All rise. The Court of the 4th Judicial District is now in session. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Blackwood presiding." Judge Blackwood, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair cut in a precise bob, took her seat and surveyed the room. Her gaze lingered for a moment on May, a slight furrow appearing between her eyebrows. "Be seated," she commanded, then looked down at her papers. Case number 2023 CV 4872, Lynn versus River Edge Development Corporation. A civil action regarding alleged environmental violations, and she looked up. "Are the parties present?" The lead attorney for River Edge, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a gold watch that caught the light when he moved, stood up. "Gregory Walsh, Your Honor, representing River Edge Development Corporation. With me are my colleagues from Walsh, Herrera, and Finch." The judge nodded, then looked expectantly at May. With a deep breath, May stood. "May Lynn, Your Honor, I am representing myself." Judge Blackwood's expression didn't change. "Ms. Lynn, are you aware that you have the right to an attorney? This is a complex case against a large corporation." "Yes, Your Honor. I understand, but I will continue pro se." The judge studied her for a moment longer. "Very well. Mr. Walsh, as the defendant's counsel, you may begin with your motion to dismiss." Walsh buttoned his jacket as he approached the podium, his movements smooth and practiced. "Thank you, Your Honor. We move for immediate dismissal of this case on multiple grounds. First and foremost, the plaintiff lacks standing to bring this suit. Ms. Lynn has not demonstrated any particular harm to herself beyond what any citizen might claim." He continued, his voice growing more dismissive with each word. "Second, the allegations are vague and unsupported by expert testimony. And finally, River Edge Development has all necessary permits and approvals from both local and state authorities." He gestured toward the mayor and council members. "The town's leadership can confirm our full compliance." Walsh turned slightly, making eye contact with several jurors. "Your Honor, while we respect Ms. Lynn's civic enthusiasm, this is clearly a waste of the court's valuable time and resources. A librarian with no legal training or scientific expertise cannot possibly comprehend the complexities of environmental regulations and construction standards." A few chuckles rippled through his team. Walsh allowed himself a small smile before continuing. "Furthermore, the economic benefits our project brings to Pine Creek are substantial. Hundreds of jobs, millions in tax revenue, and a revitalized downtown area. All of this is now jeopardized by unfounded accusations from someone who, frankly, doesn't understand what she's seeing." He returned to his seat with a confident nod to his colleagues. Judge Blackwood made a few notes, then looked at May. "Ms. Lynn, your response to the motion to dismiss?" May gathered her papers and approached the podium. Her plain blue dress and sensible shoes looked starkly out of place compared to the polished professionals around her. From the river edge table came poorly concealed smirks and whispered comments. "Poor thing," one of the female attorneys murmured, just loud enough to be heard. "This is going to be painful to watch." May placed her notes on the podium, her hands trembling slightly. When she reached for the water glass, it slipped from her fingers and crashed to the floor. The sound echoed through the courtroom, followed by more snickers from the defense table. "Take your time, Ms. Lynn," Judge Blackwood said, her tone not unkind but tinged with impatience. May bent down to pick up the larger glass pieces, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The court clerk hurried over with a small dustpan and took over the cleanup. When May finally straightened and faced the court again, she could feel every eye on her, most filled with pity or amusement. She cleared her throat. "Thank you, Your Honor." Her voice came out smaller than she intended, and she saw Walsh lean back in his chair, already looking victorious. "First," May began, her voice still soft, "regarding standing to bring this suit, I would like to direct the court's attention to Friends of the Earth versus Laidlaw Environmental Services, where the Supreme Court established that." She fumbled with her papers, dropping several sheets. More snickers erupted from the defense table. "Perhaps we should take a short recess to allow Ms. Lynn to organize her thoughts," Walsh suggested, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "That won't be necessary," May said, suddenly louder and firmer. Something in her voice made the laughter stop. She left the scattered papers where they were and stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the judge. "Your Honor, in Friends of the Earth versus Laidlaw, the Supreme Court ruled that environmental plaintiffs adequately allege injury when they aver that they use the affected area and are persons for whom the aesthetic and recreational values of the area will be lessened by the challenged activity." The courtroom fell quiet. Walsh sat up straighter. "As a resident who uses Pine Creek's water and regularly visits the creek itself, I have standing," May continued, her voice growing more confident with each word. "Furthermore, in Massachusetts versus EPA, the court recognized that states, and, by extension, citizens, have a special interest in protecting natural resources within their boundaries." She turned to face Walsh directly. "As for Mr. Walsh's claim that my allegations lack expert support, I've submitted water test results from 3 independent laboratories showing dangerous levels of benzene, toluene, and xylene in the creek downstream from River Edge's construction site. These are the same chemicals used in their foundation sealants according to their own materials list." May walked back to her table and returned with a thick binder. "I've also documented 57 specific violations of the Clean Water Act and state environmental regulations, with time-stamped photographs and GPS coordinates of each incident." The judge leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Mr. Walsh, were these materials included in the filing you received?" Walsh conferred quickly with his team, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "We received some documentation, Your Honor, but frankly, we didn't review it all in detail given the nature of the complaint." "I suggest you do so," Judge Blackwood said dryly. "Ms. Lynn, please continue." "Finally, regarding the permits and approvals," May said, gaining momentum now. "River Edge obtained these based on an environmental impact statement that promised certain safeguards and procedures. My evidence shows they are not following those procedures. A permit based on false information is not valid protection against liability." She returned to the podium, no longer seeming small or out of place despite her plain appearance. "As for Mr. Walsh's argument about economic benefits, I would remind the court that in Sierra Club versus Morton, Justice Blackmun noted that environmental interests, once destroyed, cannot be recovered. Economic projections, however appealing, do not outweigh immediate environmental harm." Walsh was now frantically flipping through documents, whispering urgently to his team. The mayor and council members behind him looked increasingly uncomfortable. Judge Blackwood studied May with new interest. "Ms. Lynn, where did you learn about these precedents?" "I read the cases, Your Honor. Our library has access to legal databases, and I've spent the past month studying relevant environmental law." The judge nodded slowly. "I see." She turned to Walsh, who was now on his feet. "Your Honor, We request a brief recess to review Ms. Lin's documentation more thoroughly. Granted. We'll reconvene after lunch. The judge struck her gavel. And Mr. Walsh, I expect your team to have actually read the plaintiff's evidence by then. As people began filing out, May gathered her papers, aware of the changed atmosphere in the room. The whispers were different now, tinged with surprise and reassessment. The River Edge team huddled together, their earlier confidence visibly shaken. Outside in the hallway, a few townspeople approached May. That was something else, said an older man who ran the hardware store. They didn't see you coming, did they? May gave a small smile. It's just the beginning, she said quietly. They'll be better prepared this afternoon. What no one in the courtroom realized was that May's hands had stopped shaking the moment she began citing case law. The nervous, bumbling librarian had disappeared, replaced by someone who moved through legal arguments with surprising ease. By lunch recess, the River Edge attorneys were no longer laughing. Instead, they were making urgent phone calls, requesting additional help from their main office. The simple woman they had ridiculed was proving to be anything but simple, and their easy victory was quickly turning into something very different. During the lunch break, May found a quiet corner in the courthouse cafeteria. Rather than eating the sandwich she'd packed, she reviewed her notes for the afternoon session. The morning had gone better than expected, but she knew the real battle was just beginning. River Edge's attorneys wouldn't underestimate her again. A table across the room, Gregory Walsh and his team huddled together, occasionally glancing in her direction. 3 more attorneys had joined them after the morning session, rushing in with additional boxes of documents. Their earlier smirks had been replaced by focused frowns. A shadow fell across May's table. She looked up to see the court reporter, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Every table's full." May nodded, moving her papers to make space. "I'm Diane," the woman said, setting down her tray. That was quite a morning. May smiled politely but said nothing, careful not to discuss the case. "Been doing this job 15 years, Diane continued, lowering her voice. "Never seen a pro se plaintiff handle themselves like that, especially against Walsh. He's eaten alive attorneys with 20 years' experience." "I just did my homework," May replied, finally taking a bite of her sandwich. Diane studied her curiously. "You know, most folks who represent themselves either can't afford a lawyer or have some kind of personal vendetta. You don't strike me as either type." May met her gaze. "Sometimes when something matters enough, you find strengths you didn't know you had." Before Diane could respond, the cafeteria buzzer sounded, signaling the end of lunch break. May gathered her materials and headed back to the courtroom, her steps more confident than they had been that morning. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Judge Blackwood called the session to order, then addressed Walsh. "Counsel, have you had sufficient time to review the plaintiff's documentation?" Walsh stood, noticeably less arrogant than before. "We have, Your Honor, though we still maintain these allegations are overstated. However, instead of pursuing our motion to dismiss it this time, we would like to propose a brief continuance to investigate some of the claims Ms. Lin has made." The judge raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a change in strategy from this morning, Mr. Walsh." "We believe in being thorough, Your Honor. My clients take environmental compliance very seriously." "I'm sure they do," Judge Blackwood replied with a hint of skepticism. "Ms. Lin, your thoughts on the defendant's request for continuance?" May rose. "I understand their need to review the evidence, Your Honor, but I'm concerned about ongoing damage to the creek while we wait. Perhaps we could discuss temporary injunctive relief to halt the activities in question until this matter is resolved." Walsh nearly knocked over his water glass. "Your Honor, a temporary injunction would cost my client hundreds of thousands of dollars in construction delays. This is precisely the kind of overreaction we cautioned against this morning." "Is it an overreaction to prevent potential permanent damage to a public water source?" May countered. "Under Winter v. Natural Resources Defense Counsel, the standard for preliminary injunction requires showing likelihood of success on the merits, irreparable harm in the absence of preliminary relief, balance of equities in the plaintiff's favor, and that an injunction is in the public interest. I believe my evidence satisfies all four conditions. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Walsh, did your client perform the weekly water testing required by their permits? Walsh conferred with his team before answering. We believe so, Your Honor. That's not a yes, Judge Blackwood noted. Ms. Lynn, do you have evidence regarding these tests? May approached the bench with a folder. Yes, Your Honor. Public records show River Edge filed only 2 test reports in the past 6 months, despite permit requirements for weekly testing. Furthermore, those tests were conducted upstream from their facility, not downstream where contamination would be detected. Judge Blackwood reviewed the documents, her expression hardening. Mr. Walsh, this appears to be a clear violation of permit requirements. Walsh's face flushed. Your Honor, if there were administrative oversights, we can certainly address them. But a construction delay would create undue hardship for my client and the community relying on the jobs this project provides. I'm more concerned with undue hardship to citizens who might be drinking contaminated water, the judge replied sharply. She thought for a moment, then continued. Here's what we're going to do. I'm granting a limited continuance of 2 weeks. During that time, all construction activities within 100 feet of the waterway will cease. Furthermore, I'm ordering independent water testing to be conducted at River Edge's expense, with daily monitoring. Walsh started to object, but Judge Blackwood raised a hand to silence him. That's my ruling, counsel. We'll reconvene on May 17th at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned. As people began filing out of the courtroom, May felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She had won this round, but the real fight was still ahead. She carefully packed her documents, aware of whispered conversations around her. Ms. Lynn. Gregory. Walsh's voice stopped her as she turned to leave. He stood nearby with 2 of his associates, his expression unreadable. A word, please? May nodded, bracing herself. That was unexpected, he said, studying her with new interest. I think we got off on the wrong foot this morning. Perhaps we could discuss a potential settlement? My clients are reasonable people. I'm happy to consider any proposal that addresses the environmental violations and ensures proper remediation of the creek, May replied evenly. Walsh smiled thinly. I'll have something drafted for your review. Though I must say I'm curious, where did you learn to litigate like that? You're clearly not just a librarian who read a few law books. May returned his gaze steadily. Everyone has a past, Mr. Walsh. What matters is the present, specifically, the present condition of Pine Creek's water. She walked away, leaving Walsh staring after her with a mixture of curiosity and frustration. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. News of the morning's events had spread quickly through town. Mr. Harlow, the retired teacher who had first suggested the lawsuit, approached with a wide smile. You did it, he exclaimed. Everyone's talking about how you stood up to those big city lawyers. It's just a temporary measure, May cautioned. The real case hasn't even started yet. Still, you've given folks hope, Mr. Harlow said, nodding toward the gathered townspeople. That counts for something. That evening, as May walked home along her usual route, she paused on the stone bridge. The creek below still showed signs of contamination, but now yellow caution tape marked the construction area upstream, and workers were installing monitoring equipment as the judge had ordered. She leaned against the railing, letting the events of the day wash over her. For 5 years, she had lived quietly in Pine Creek, keeping to herself, guarding her secrets. Today had changed everything. Questions would come about her past, her knowledge, her sudden transformation in court. Sooner or later, she would have to provide answers. Back at her small cottage, May made herself a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table. From a locked drawer, she removed an old photograph, a younger version of herself standing on the steps of a prestigious law school, wearing graduation robes and a confident smile. Beside her stood a tall man with gentle eyes, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at some forgotten joke. She traced the outline of his face with her finger, then returned the photo to its hiding place. That life, the one where she had been Professor Lin Chen, environmental law expert at Coastal Eastern University. felt like it belonged to someone else now. After Thomas's death, after the accident that had claimed her husband's life and nearly broken her, she had walked away from everything, seeking anonymity and peace in a small town where no one knew her name or her grief. For 5 years, that had been enough. Now circumstances had pulled her back into a world she had left behind, forcing her to use skills she had buried along with her heart. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The screen showed an unfamiliar number with the area code of the city she had once called home. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Professor Chen?" a male voice asked. "Or do you go by Mei Lin now?" May's breath caught. "Who is this?" "Robert Dunning. I was your research assistant at EU Law. I saw your name in a legal brief that crossed my desk today, a case against River Edge Development. I almost didn't believe it was you." May closed her eyes. Her past was catching up faster than she had anticipated. "How did you find me, Robert?" "That doesn't matter," he replied. "What matters is that Walsh, Herrera, and Finch just brought in their entire environmental litigation team for an emergency strategy session about your case. They're rattled, Professor. Whatever you did today, you've got them scared." "I'm not a professor anymore," May said quietly. "Maybe not," Robert acknowledged, "but you're still the same brilliant legal mind who taught me everything I know about environmental law. And you should know, they're digging into your background. It won't take them long to discover who you really are." As she hung up the phone, May gazed out her window at the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in years she felt fully awake. The simple woman everyone had underestimated was about to reveal just how complex she truly was. The next morning, May woke before dawn. Sleep had been elusive, her mind racing with thoughts of the case and Robert's warning. She made herself a strong cup of tea and sat by her kitchen window, watching as the first hints of sunlight crept across the sky. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Robert. "They've assigned a private investigator to look into your background. Be careful." May placed the phone down and took a deep breath. She had known this moment might come. For 5 years she had lived in Pine Creek as simply Mei Lin, the quiet librarian. Few people knew her real name was Lin Chen, and no one knew she had once been one of the most respected environmental law professors on the East Coast. By 7 o'clock she was at the library, using the computers to search for information about River Edge that might have escaped her earlier research. The company had projects in 12 states, and as she dug deeper, she found a pattern. Small towns, promises of economic growth, and a trail of environmental violations settled quietly out of court. A soft knock on the library door startled her. The library wouldn't open for another hour, but through the glass, she saw Mr. Harlow waving urgently. She let him in. "Have you seen this?" he asked, holding up that morning's Pine Creek Gazette. The front page headline read, "Local librarian stuns court with legal expertise." Below it was a photo of May leaving the courthouse. "It was bound to happen," she said with a resigned sigh. "There's more," Mr. Harlow said, his expression troubled. "2 men were asking questions about you at the diner this morning, showing people an old photograph. They said they were from the law firm representing River Edge." May's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About how long you've lived here, your background, where you came from. Folks didn't have much to tell them, of course. You've always kept to yourself." "Thank you for letting me know," May said, turning back to her computer. "I need to finish this research before they find me." Mr. Harlow hesitated. "May, or whatever your real name is, I don't know what you're hiding from, but this town owes you a debt. If there's anything we can do to help." She met his gaze, touched by the offer. "Just keep an eye on the creek. Make sure they're following the judge's orders about water testing." After Mr. Harlow left, May printed her findings and locked the library. Instead of going home, she drove to the county seat 30 miles away, where public records were kept. She needed information that couldn't be found online. The county clerk's office was quiet when she arrived. An elderly man with thick glasses looked up from his desk. "Can I help you? I need to see all property records for land purchased by River Edge Development." or any of its subsidiary companies in the past 3 years, May explained. 2 hours later, she sat surrounded by property deeds, tax records, and zoning applications. A pattern emerged that confirmed her suspicions. River Edge had been quietly buying land around Pine Creek's water table, strategic purchases that made no sense for their luxury housing development, but would give them control over the town's water supply. But why? The answer came in an environmental survey buried in an appendix to their permit application. Test bores had revealed a significant deposit of rare earth minerals beneath the creek bed, elements crucial for electronics manufacturing and worth millions. Their development wasn't about housing at all. It was about gaining access to those minerals regardless of the environmental cost. May carefully photographed the relevant documents with her phone. As she was finishing, she noticed a man watching her from across the room. Tall, clean-cut, with the unmistakable bearing of a former law enforcement officer. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, pretending to examine a property map. The private investigator, she guessed. Her time was running out. Back in Pine Creek, May drove straight to the newspaper office. The editor, a woman named Liz who had reported on the hearing, looked up in surprise when May walked in. "I have information about River Edge that people need to know," May said without preamble. "But before I share it, I need to tell you something about myself." An hour later, May left the newspaper office with Liz's promise that tomorrow's front page would tell both stories: the truth about River Edge's real intentions and the identity of the woman who had uncovered them. As May walked to her car, she spotted Gregory Walsh getting out of a black SUV across the street. He wasn't alone. With him was a woman May recognized immediately, Judith Hayes, River Edge's CEO. They saw her at the same moment. Walsh whispered something to Hayes, who nodded and headed directly toward May. She was tall and immaculately dressed, with the confident stride of someone used to getting her way. "Ms. Lin?" Hayes called. "Or should I say Professor Chen? I was hoping we might talk." May stood her ground. "I think your attorneys would advise against that, Ms. Hayes." Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Let's set aside legal formalities for a moment. I came to Pine Creek personally because I believe we can resolve this situation to everyone's benefit." "I'm listening," May said cautiously. "Join me for coffee?" Hayes gestured to a nearby cafe. "I promise to be brief." Inside the cafe, Hayes ordered for both of them without asking May's preference. When they were seated in a corner booth away from other customers, Hayes got straight to the point. "We know who you are, Professor Chen. Your work on the Coastal Protection Act was brilliant. 3 Supreme Court citations and a single opinion. That's quite a legacy." May said nothing, waiting. "Which makes your current situation all the more puzzling," Hayes continued. 5 years ago, you were at the top of your field. Then, after your husband's accident, you disappeared, changed your name, buried yourself in this little town." She leaned forward. "Why?" "My past is not relevant to this case," May replied evenly. "But it is," Hayes insisted, "because I'm offering you a chance to reclaim that past. River Edge needs someone with your expertise. We're prepared to offer you a position as our Chief Environmental Compliance Officer. 7-figure salary, full relocation package, and the resources to actually make a difference on a national scale." May's expression didn't change. "In exchange for dropping my lawsuit. In exchange for helping us do better," Hayes corrected smoothly. "You've identified some legitimate concerns with our Pine Creek project. Help us fix them properly. And the rare earth minerals you're really after? The ones you didn't mention in any of your public filings?" Hayes's smile faltered slightly. "I see you've been thorough. Yes, there are valuable resources in the area. Resources that could create jobs and prosperity for decades. With proper environmental protocols, everyone wins. Except the creek, and everyone who depends on the water table you'd have to disrupt to access those minerals." Hayes sat back, studying May. "You know, I admired your legal work for years. When I heard you were the one behind this lawsuit, I was genuinely surprised. The Professor Chen I followed would have seen the bigger picture, the economic benefits, the technological advancement those minerals enable. The Professor Chen you followed watched her husband die because a company decided profit margins were more important than safety protocols, May said quietly. The accident that killed Thomas wasn't an accident at all. It was the inevitable result of cutting corners, of prioritizing deadlines over proper procedures, just like you're doing here. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Hayes reached into her briefcase and removed a folder. This is our settlement offer. $1 million, no admission of wrongdoing, and we'll implement additional water safety measures. She placed it on the table. Or we can take this to court, where we'll be forced to question your mental stability following your husband's death, your abandonment of your career, and your assumed identity. It would be unpleasant. May didn't touch the folder. Is that a threat, Ms. Hayes? It's a reality check. You're one person against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Even with your expertise, those odds aren't good. Perhaps, May acknowledged. But there's something you should know before you leave. She nodded toward the cafe window, where they could see the Pine Creek Gazette building across the street. I've just spent an hour with Liz Chen, no relation, the newspaper editor. Tomorrow's front page will detail everything I've found about River Edge's true plans for Pine Creek, including the undisclosed mineral deposits and your pattern of environmental violations in other communities. Hayes's face hardened. Local news. Hardly matters. Maybe not, May agreed. But I also sent the information to my former colleague at Environmental Law Review, who shared it with 6 national news outlets. They're particularly interested in the connection between River Edge and 3 members of the State Environmental Regulation Board who approved your permits despite staff objections. For the first time, Hayes looked uncertain. You're bluffing. You investigated me, Ms. Hayes. You know my reputation as a professor. Did I ever bluff? Hayes abruptly stood, leaving the settlement folder untouched. This isn't over, Professor. No, May agreed. The hearing resumes in 12 days. I'll see you in court. After Hayes stormed out, May remained seated, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline ebbed. Through the window, she watched Hayes and Walsh engaged in intense conversation beside their SUV. They kept glancing toward the cafe, their expressions grim. May had told the truth about the newspaper article, but the national news outlets were a bluff, one she now needed to make real. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through contacts she hadn't used in years. Old colleagues, former students now working as environmental attorneys, journalists who had once quoted her in articles about conservation law. It was time to fully emerge from hiding, to use not just her knowledge but also her reputation and connections. The simple Librarian Act had served its purpose. Now Pine Creek needed Professor Lin Chen, with all the influence and expertise that name carried. As she began making calls, May felt a weight lifting, the burden of pretending to be less than she was, of hiding her grief instead of channeling it into purpose. River Edge had made a critical mistake. They had assumed that exposing her true identity would weaken her case. Instead, it had freed her to fight with every resource she possessed. The next 2 weeks transformed Pine Creek. After the newspaper published its explosive front-page story revealing River Edge's true plans and May's real identity, the town buzzed with a new energy. People who had barely noticed the quiet librarian now stopped her on the street to offer support or share information about suspicious activities they'd observed at the construction site. The national media attention May had bluffed about became reality. 3 major news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath battle between a small town and a powerful corporation. Environmental groups organized protests outside River Edge headquarters in the city. Online petitions demanding a full investigation gathered thousands of signatures. Through it all, May worked tirelessly to prepare for the upcoming hearing. Her small cottage became command central, with stacks of documents covering every surface. Former colleagues and students, hearing that Professor Lin Chen had resurfaced, offered their expertise. Robert, her old research assistant, arrived in Pine Creek with 3 environmental law specialists who volunteered to help without charge. Consider it repayment for everything you taught us, Robert said when May tried to protest. Besides, nobody in the legal community has forgotten what happened to Thomas. Many of us have waited years for a chance to hold companies like River Edge accountable. 2 days before the hearing, May received an unexpected visitor. Diane, the court reporter, stood on her doorstep holding a small flash drive. "I shouldn't be doing this," Diane said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "But there are things you need to know." Inside, Diane explained that she had been approached by one of Walsh's associates with an offer of money in exchange for information about the upcoming proceedings, a clear attempt to tamper with court processes. "I recorded the conversation," Diane said, indicating the flash drive. "And there's more. Judge Blackwood's clerk overheard a phone call between Walsh and someone on the State Environmental Board. They were discussing how to make certain documents disappear before your next hearing." May stared at the small device. "This is serious, Diane. You could lose your job." "Some things matter more than jobs," Diane replied simply. "My kids swim in that creek every summer." On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse was packed beyond capacity. News vans lined the street outside, and a crowd gathered on the steps, many holding signs supporting Pine Creek or condemning River Edge. Inside, the gallery was standing room only, with people from neighboring towns joining local residents. When May entered, no longer dressed in her simple librarian clothes but in a professional suit that spoke of her former life, a hush fell over the room. She walked confidently to her table, now flanked by Robert and the volunteer legal team. Across the aisle, Walsh and his attorneys watched her warily, their earlier mockery replaced by obvious concern. Judge Blackwood called the court to order. "Before we proceed, I want to address the significant public attention this case has received since our last session. While I understand the community's interest, this court will base its decision solely on the law and the evidence presented. Is that clear?" Everyone nodded. "Good. Now, Mr. Walsh, you indicated in your latest filing that River Edge has new information to present?" Walsh stood, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. "Yes, Your Honor. First, River Edge wishes to clarify that there was no intention to mislead regarding the presence of mineral deposits in the project area. These were simply not relevant to the housing development plans." May watched him carefully. This was a strategic retreat, acknowledging what could no longer be denied while trying to minimize its importance. "Furthermore," Walsh continued, "my clients have prepared a revised environmental impact statement addressing the concerns raised by Professor Chen. We believe these new protective measures fully satisfy all regulatory requirements." He emphasized her title slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of her expertise that hadn't been present before. "We're also prepared to offer substantial funding for creek restoration and ongoing water quality monitoring. River Edge takes its corporate responsibility seriously and wants to be a good neighbor to Pine Creek." Judge Blackwood turned to May. "Professor Chen, your response?" May rose, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. "Your Honor, while I appreciate River Edge's newfound concern for environmental protection, their revised statement fails to address the fundamental issue. Their planned excavation for the rare earth minerals they now acknowledge seeking would irreparably damage the aquifer that supplies water to 5 communities in this county." She approached the bench with a set of documents. "These independent geological surveys conducted over the past 2 weeks confirm that the mining process River Edge intends to use would introduce toxic heavy metals into the groundwater. No amount of protective measures can prevent this contamination once it begins." Walsh was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, we strongly dispute these findings. Our own experts have a financial interest in the outcome," May finished. For him, every expert who prepared River Edge's environmental statements is either a company employee or has received substantial consulting fees from River Edge in the past 3 years. She handed another document to the judge. "Here are the financial disclosures that should have accompanied their testimony, but were conveniently omitted." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Walsh conferred urgently with his team. "Furthermore," May continued, "I have evidence of attempts to improperly influence these proceedings." She explained about Diane's recording and the overheard conversation about making documents disappear. Judge Blackwood's expression darkened. "These are serious allegations, Professor Chen." "Yes, Your Honor, I've provided copies of the recording and sworn statements to the State Attorney General's office this morning, but they speak to a pattern of behavior that's relevant to our current proceedings. Walsh was now in damage control mode. Your Honor, if any inappropriate conversations occurred, they were without the knowledge or approval of River Edge's leadership. We categorically deny any attempt to obstruct justice. Yet it fits a pattern, May replied. She turned to the courtroom and pointed to a man sitting in the back row. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alan Way, former Environmental Compliance Officer for River Edge. He's prepared to testify about systematic falsification of water quality data at 3 other River Edge projects. This was her trump card, a whistleblower who had contacted her after seeing the news reports, bringing internal documents that revealed a company-wide policy of environmental corner cutting. Walsh's face went pale. Your Honor, we were given no notice of this witness, just as the people of Pine Creek were given no notice of your plans to mine rare earth minerals beneath their water supply, May countered. Dr. Way came forward only yesterday, and as the rules of discovery allow, we're presenting this new evidence at the earliest opportunity. For the next hour, Dr. Way testified about internal River Edge meetings where executives explicitly discussed ways to circumvent environmental regulations. He presented emails from Judith Hayes herself, directing staff to handle the testing in-house, after independent labs had found concerning levels of toxins near project sites. As Dr. Way spoke, May watched the River Edge team growing increasingly agitated. Walsh passed notes to his colleagues, who hurried in and out of the courtroom making phone calls. The atmosphere had completely shifted from the first hearing. Now it was the corporate attorneys who seemed out of their depth, scrambling to counter evidence they hadn't anticipated. During a brief recess, Walsh approached May outside the courtroom. This has gone far enough, he said in a low voice. Ms. Hayes has authorized me to offer a complete withdrawal from the Pine Creek project. No development, no mining, nothing. We'll donate the land to a conservation trust. May regarded him steadily. And the other communities where River Edge has already caused damage? What about them? Walsh looked genuinely confused. This case is about Pine Creek. No, Mr. Walsh. This case began about Pine Creek, but it's grown into something much larger. Dr. Way's testimony affects people in 3 states who don't even know their water has been contaminated. When court resumed, Judge Blackwood seemed to have reached a decision. In light of the testimony and evidence presented today, I am issuing an immediate and permanent injunction against all River Edge activities in Pine Creek. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Justice for potential criminal investigation. She fixed Walsh with a stern look. The court is deeply troubled by the pattern of deception revealed here today. While corporations have rights under the law, they also have responsibilities, chief among them not poisoning the communities where they operate. Walsh stood to object, but the judge continued. Save it, counsel. You'll have plenty of opportunity to make your arguments to federal investigators. Court is adjourned. As people began filing out, a burst of applause erupted from the gallery. Judge Blackwood struck her gavel once but made no real effort to silence the celebration. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters surrounded May with questions about what would happen next. She answered carefully, emphasizing that this victory belonged to everyone in Pine Creek who had spoken up and shared information. As the crowd began to disperse, she noticed Gregory Walsh standing alone at the bottom of the steps watching her. She excused herself from the reporters and walked down to meet him. I underestimated you, he said simply. We all did. It's a common mistake, May replied. People often confuse simplicity with simplicity of mind. Walsh nodded. For what it's worth, I didn't know about the worst of it. The falsified data, the attempts to tamper with the court. I should have asked more questions. Yes, you should have, May agreed. What will you do now? He looked surprised by the question. Defend my client as best I can, I suppose, though after today I'm not sure how long they'll remain my client. There are other clients, Mr. Walsh. Better ones. She held his gaze. You're a skilled attorney. Imagine what you could accomplish if you used those skills to protect communities instead of corporations that harm them. She didn't wait for his response but turned, and walked back up the steps to where Robert and her team waited. Together, they headed toward the diner where the town had organized an impromptu celebration. That evening, May returned to the stone bridge where she had first noticed the pollution in the creek. The water below was still not completely clean, that would take time, but today marked the beginning of its healing. Just as the past few weeks had marked the beginning of her own, she would never be just the quiet librarian again. But as she watched the sunset reflect on the water, May realized she didn't want to return completely to her old life either. The woman she had become in Pine Creek, less ambitious perhaps, but more connected to the community around her, was also a vital part of who she was now. Perhaps there was a middle path, a way to use her legal brilliance not in prestigious classrooms, but in small towns where ordinary people faced powerful interests. Places where someone who understood both the law and the simplicity of everyday concerns could make a real difference. As darkness fell, May turned toward home, her mind already turning to possibilities. This case was ending, but her new journey was just beginning.